Good afternoon. Welcome to Public Safety Committee meeting. I'm joined by my colleague Martin Ave, Amir Gathers, and Patrona Joan Rouser. And myself, Chol Majuk, as the chair. We are here today to discuss two agenda items, one being shot spotter, the other one being the overtime slash the scheduled. Without further ado, I want to give it to Chief to give us an overview, and thank you for coming with your team.
You're very
Appreciate
welcome.
you.
Yeah. Listen, Councilor, I want to thank you too for calling the committee meeting. I know a lot of times when you spend money and you're over budget in a vacuum, it somewhat looks like you're being feckless with the money, with the taxpayers' money. So this committee meeting is a great opportunity to show not only yourself, your fellow councilors, but the taxpayers who pay our salary exactly why we're over budget and what we're spending the money on, and that we aren't being feckless. So I'm going to give you just that quick overview, and then certainly welcome to ask any questions you have. The entire team is here. So keep in mind, as all of you know, our current staffing is at 380. Our budgeted strength is 423. So we're down 43 cops right now. That's 43 cops that could be taking calls on straight time, not overtime, and reducing that overtime budget. But right now we don't have those numbers. We don't have that budgeted strength. And if you look at the numbers, unfortunately, that are taking the civil service test, the forecast for reaching that number is dire. So in the meantime, what we do is supplement with officers on overtime. Again, not being feckless, we do it for specific reasons. And we also started the budget year. We also started this budget year, as you know, $2.4 million less in overtime than we typically do. So here's what we use it for. The largest driver of the overtime budget is patrol minimum staffing. These are the officers in the black and whites, the officers taking the 911 calls, the calls that, as you know, never cease to come through 911. To this aim, not only are they taking the calls out there, but we've reduced response time for many of the calls by 30%. The vast majority of that 30% reduction has been in quality of life type complaints, the very complaints that frustrate citizens the most, and end up, if they don't get a response, with calls to all of you, to the mayor's office, to me, to the deputy chiefs, and everyone else. 30% reduction is what we've been able to do out there with these minimum staffing numbers. Secondly, the numbers are there for proactive work. To this aim, violent crime is down 21.1% this year over last. We've already seized 56 illegal guns off the street this year. Every category of gun crime is down from last year. Shots fired down 40%, shooting with injuries down 33%, shootings with injury or death down 50%. And here's the really big one, is victims injured or deceased down 60%. That's 60% fewer people that are either dead or lying in a hospital with gunshot wounds, and 60% fewer families suffering the trauma of that. These decreases don't happen by accident. They happen because you put the right number of officers out there to do proactive policing. Proactive policing means the right number of officers need to be there. And thirdly, the numbers are there because we want to be able to allow for public engagement as well. So aside from 911 calls and doing proactive work, we want to make sure the officers are there to be on foot patrols, bike patrols, Cooper curves, and even stopping by cookouts, playing basketball on the street with kids, and those types of engagements. Again, they don't happen by accident. We have been trying to create a philosophy on the police department of engagement. The biggest example of this is Jimmy Oliver and all his work he's done with PAL. But when you create this philosophy, these younger officers, and I mentioned it before to all of you, the younger officers seem to buy into this philosophy and look for opportunities to engage on their own. The fourth category, and by no means the least, is officer safety. We have to put the number of officers out there that makes it safe for the officers that are doing the work. So with all that said, we implemented the 10-hour shift in September of 2023. This was a major undertaking. I've been on now 40 years. Nothing like it had ever been done. Nothing close to this had ever been done. So initially it cost money. The reason is because anytime you implement a major change like this, it's probably going to cost money at the onset, but not in the long run. More specifically in this case, we implemented in September. which meant we were still dealing with summertime issues, all the crime, all the gun violence. We also had a bunch of people who had already put in for their holidays and other days, which we were contractually obligated to give off when the holidays rolled around. In addition to that, we had 4 command officers, 2 captains and 2 lieutenants, strategic positions that went out for extended period of times that we could not predict and had to fill in with overtime. It all meant that we had to feel our way around this 10-hour shift, backfilling with overtime to make sure we had the right numbers of people to accomplish all those objectives that I mentioned, response times, proactive work, public engagement, officer safety. Also keep in mind, we were now scheduling, and it took me a while to wrap my head around this one, we were scheduling for 30 hours a day and no longer 24 hours a day, 6 extra hours a day for officers working the patrol shift because we had 10-hour shifts now. I'm sorry, did you? Oh, yeah, so if we go to the handout marked overtime, this lays it out very, very meticulously and clearly.
Chief?
It was this one here. I didn't make copies. I sent it to Nathan. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I sent it to him just an hour or so ago. Oh, thanks. I got one. Yep, I do. I knew you guys hired Nader for a reason.
Thank you, Nader.
I see, Nader, if you do have one, I'll take it because yours is on legal and it's much larger than the one I have. So, yeah, you and I, both senior citizens, we got to have the font big. So what you see here very clearly draws out exactly what I said. So if you go through this in the blue, what you're seeing in the blue are pay periods. This is minimum staffing overtime. All the blue pay periods are before we implemented the 10-hour day. So we were always using minimum staffing to cover those 43 vacancies, to fill spots in patrol. Again, the officers in the black and whites doing all those things we're talking about. You can see the numbers. They range anywhere from 26 or 24,000 all the way up to 34,000, but mostly you're in the range under $30,000 in minimum staffing. Again, these are officers in those cars, not using the money feckless or doling it out for no reason. These are officers in the cars to do actual work on the street. In the green, what you're seeing in the green is when we implemented the 10-hour day. You can see it begin to spike for all those reasons I just mentioned. Implementing it in September and all the reasons I talked about where we were trying to feel our way through this 10-hour day, almost as if it was a pilot, because that's what it was. So in the green, you see that number of minimum staffing. Again, all patrol officers begin to spike as high as $117,000 going to those officers to fill those gaps so that we could do all those things that I mentioned in patrol. At the first of the year, again, we were over the holidays. We had piloted out for 4 months or so. We started to make corrections. So in that gold number, which is indicated in pay period 2, you will see at $88,000 or so is the first correction. Drop the number down. Number 3, which is, I guess, kind of an orange color, pay period 3, we made some more corrections, dropped it down to $53,000. And then we really made some corrections because we were really into this thing and we felt our way around it and knew where we could accomplish all those 4 things I mentioned and at the same time reduce the overtime. And you can see in pink, reddish pink numbers, pay periods 4, 5, and 6. We dropped the number down to 13. It went back up to 16, and our final pay period is around just under $20,000, which, by the way, is lower than it was before we even implemented the 10-hour day, indicating that the 10-hour day is, in fact, in the long run, going to save us money, but in the short run did not do that. What I can tell you, counselors, is that we are already seeing a savings as well in training, whereas before the 10-hour day, we would take numbers of people off shifts, send them to training. We lose those people on the shift, have to backfill with overtime because they were off doing training. Now, during our power days, which occur 2 times a month, where we have vast numbers of officers on the shift, we're able to bring the trainers to the shift, train them on the shifts, And if the shift is an 8-hour shift, they still have 2 hours to work. If the training is 5 hours, they still have 5 hours to work, but they're not leaving the shift. We're bringing the trainers to them. So we're seeing a cost benefit to that. In addition to that, wanted to mention some of the other things that put us over. Again, we started the budget year $2.4 million less in our overtime budget. These categories are not things that we wanted to pull back on either. They're Armory Square. We dedicated $0 to Armory Square, even though we knew we were going to have to field it to make things safer in the Armory Square. That budget item right now sits at $205,000 and was not budgeted at all because we were getting the cut in $2.5 million in overtime. Downtown proactive detail. This was brought on because of complaints we were receiving from counselors, the mayor's office, and citizens and residents, primarily in the southern end of our downtown area, centered around Salt City restaurant, the Salt City Market, with all kinds of issues: drug use, drug sales, violence, assaults, things like that. We're very much aware that downtown is our economic engine, our cultural engine. We needed to put people there. We budgeted for a certain amount, but we've gone well over that, $90,000 over it, because this detail has expanded beyond that into other parts of downtown to make sure that people that live, work, and play there, come down here to eat, feel like they're seeing a uniform presence there and feel like they're safe. Not to mention, not only feel safe, but we are addressing all those issues that we started getting complaints about: the drug use, the drug sales, the violence that's going on down there. Summer deployment, another thing that we budgeted for but went over because we were seeing some spikes in crime, and officers were willing to volunteer for that detail, so we put more officers on during summer where we typically see high numbers of calls. Drug investigations. These are the calls that all of you get for drug houses, for the overdoses we're getting. Our drug investigations division has done, to this date, 34 drug search warrants. 34, which is a huge number for March, given that their number in that division is only 19. When I came on the job, it was well over 50 people working out of that division, and now 19. 34 drug search warrants, recovering large amounts of fentanyl, meth, and other drugs, and arresting those who think they can distribute that poison throughout our city. Protests and demonstrations, security for those put us well over our budget as well, because we could not predict issues that were happening within our nation or 6,700 miles away overseas that would affect us, so that we had to put extra folks out there during protests and demonstrations to make sure everyone was safe while they were exercising their right to protest and demonstrate. Could not predict that, so that put us over. There was a chronic retail theft, which we put a bunch of money behind as well. When a bunch of stores came to us and said we're about to shutter our doors because of chronic retail theft that's going on, one store said that they were at the threshold of $260,000 per year, and when they hit a certain amount, they were going to close it. It's no mystery now that this is Right Ed on Butternut Street. We were able to put money behind that to stop them from shuttering their doors. The retail theft there is lower than they've ever seen. They've been in to visit with the mayor to talk about that. We've spread that detail out to the mall and other businesses so that we don't have retail theft of a few people chronically stealing, not to get food to eat, but to steal clothing and other merchandise to go sell it to someone else and make a business out of it. We can't have stores, especially places like Rite Aid, shuttering because of a few people, and then have no one in that neighborhood have anywhere to go for their pharmaceuticals and things of that nature. Festivals and parades put us over. Once again, we could not predict what was happening in this country. Certainly could not predict what was going to happen 6,700 miles away. All the festivals and parades were affected by that. We had to put extra people on it. We had to put sometimes a SWAT contingent on it to make sure everyone at those events was safe and we didn't have something occur. I could go on and on and on about things that put us over. The bottom line is everything that put us over was actual police work. The vast majority of it was uniform police work out there on the street in the uniform cars, making sure we were handling the gun violence, the proactive work, public engagement, and all of those things. I think I've run out of energy. Happy to take.
So Chief, I think I wanna stay above ground a little bit before we get into the details of the finances. You know, you were budgeted for 423 officers. You have 480.
380.
380, I'm sorry, 380. 380 on staff. With that type of budget, I said I'm going to stay above because I want to get into the nut and bolt of this committee, especially the finance. I'm going to leave my other colleague to go deep, but part of my concern as a member of this committee, especially when we were approving the changes of schedule, part of that concern and appreciation for that was officers' safety, especially when it comes to their health. And the way you look, it seemed to me that has not happened, because if overtime is this much, the safety of officers is a problem. How do we address that, considering that was one of the major reasons as to what was driving the changes of schedule?
Yeah, so listen, with officer safety, we are keenly interested in that, obviously, keenly focused on that. We have an officer up in, that's his only job, officer and wellness officer. We implemented that shortly after I stepped into this role because we are keenly interested in making sure that happens. I will say this, we monitor officers to make sure, if I'm understanding your point, the overtime is there, officers are partaking in it, but we make sure that the officers that are coming in to work every day are looked at by the sergeants that are there, the supervisors, the lieutenants, the officers that's riding alongside of them. In many cases, because of the 10-hour day, they're all riding double now because of the cars. Most of the calls out there are double cars anyways, double units anyways, so it's good to have them doubled up, but we are keenly interested to make sure they are safe. And well, and happy with what they're doing. I will say this, one of the indicators of that is complaints to CRB and to IAD, which are down right now, which means that officers are doing the job, doing it professionally, and apparently are healthy and happy when they're coming into work. If I misjudged that question, sir, I can answer it a different way. I will tell you this, you started out with budgeted numbers. If we had 423, certainly 43 officers would bring that overtime number down. It would mean fewer people were working overtime. Everyone would be on straight shifts. Would the number go away completely? No way to tell that. Probably not completely, but it would certainly drive that number down. 43 extra officers out there taking calls would drive those numbers down. But again, I want to make sure I
Right.
covered that.
No,
answer.
my concern, or at least a question, Chief, was directed toward trying to understand the logic that drove the changes of the schedule, which was part of it was safety, and then at the back end of that, which is other important factor, as we reduce overtime, it means that more officers are spending time away from work and with their families, and somehow that should be able to help with their health. With overtime this much, my question was, how do you help us understand that?
Yeah.
Especially when the overtime is not showing what we initially intended.
Sure. So,
Chief, before you answer that, if
go
I
ahead.
may, when the shift change was implemented, where were we? What month was that? What year was that? Was last year? September of last year.
September.
How many officers did we have? Was that number still the same, or did it become less because of retirements and injuries and things like that? So I think we could also take that into consideration too, to determine whether or not how many officers were able to work and to keep the city going. So with less officers, we can't answer that many calls, but more officers we have, or more people that are available to work, then it will reflect on how much overtime or how much pay the person will be making.
Yeah, so it's a good point. I think we've hovered around the 380s. Maybe we've gone to 390. I don't know what our numbers were during that period of time, but we've been hovering around 380 area. I will say this, Counselor. So having 4 days off, maybe someone's, obviously officers are coming in and working a couple of those days. I've made it a mission every time I run into officers. Again, this is only affects patrol. Every time I run into an officer in the hallway, in the courtyard, anywhere, in patrol, at roll calls, ask him or her, how do you like the shift? Have not received one person that said, hate it. And some of these people start out by saying I was a negative, meaning the PBA took a vote. Not everyone was for it. Some of them actually said, I didn't believe in this shift. I thought it was going to be terrible, and I'm loving it now. And I ask them a follow-up question all the time of why. I get to be home, spend more time with the family, get things done at home. If it's male officers, they say my wife has more things for me to do. If it's female officers, they say my husband has more things for me to do, and I'm getting more done. No one, and again, I've asked lots of people, no one has said that they don't enjoy the shift, and it's for that reason. If you take that as the only indicator that they're spending more time at home, I think they are healthier. I think the shift has done what it's meant to do. It is, by the way, when you look at the numbers, when they print those numbers in the Post-Standard or wherever, and it shows those officers making tremendous amounts of money, it's really only a few. The rest of them are working overtime, just like they used to when we had the 5-2 schedule, working extra shifts here and there, and not doing so much that they are unsafe or unhealthy.
So can you just reflect a little bit on the effects of the retention and maybe retirement as well as recruitment?
Great question. Recruitment is still, again, is very dire right now. People taking the civil service test.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about the civil service test. Is that like?
It's hovering. Last one was 72 people. And just to give you an indication, when there was, 5 years ago, probably about 5 years ago, it used to sit at around 700. It's now 72 people. And that's 72 people for the entire county, every agency picking off that list. Those are 72 people that end up on the list having passed both the academic and the physical fitness test. Very small number. They splinter off and go to other places. We just have to do better with getting the message out, getting more people to realize this is an honorable job. I speak about it all the time. I know officers that do it. It's the most noble job of all, protecting people, protecting property. As far as retention, Counselor, we've done very good. Many fewer people have left the job. And again, everyone knows I've spoken very highly of my predecessor, so this is in no way to denigrate him. But there was 1 year under my predecessor where we lost 57 people in 1 year. That number is 1 or 2 people a year since I took over. I've been here a short period of time. But I will say we have 2 or 3 large classes that are coming up on retirement in the next year or two. And if they start going, we will lose dozens and dozens of people and only bring on academies in the single digits. And that will be a major problem.
Keith?
I'm not sure if the counselor was done. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
I apologize.
I'm sorry. I guess.
Okay. So last Friday, I called the non-emergency number, 4:30, 5 o'clock. The waiting time, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, till I finally got on. This is some of the calls from my constituents. The waiting time is long, 6, 7 minutes. Is there a certain peak time where the calls are so overwhelming that people have to wait? Because if they get impatient, they're gonna call 911. And this may have to do with an accident. This might be a crime in progress. So could you answer what are your peak times for calls? And is this due to a shortage of staff, or you need more than one, or how many people you have operating the phones, the dispatch?
Yeah. So, Counselor, when you say non-emergency, are you calling 442-5111?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna ask Chief Russin to come on up and just talk about peak times, what numbers to call, and I'm sorry, Mark, is 5100 the 911 non-emergency or ours?
It'll all, so let me talk about a couple things. The peak time is a great question. So we start to see the peak calls for service, but I think you need to look at calls for service in terms of what type of call is actually coming on. But the calls in terms of quantity really started around 10 a.m. and they continue until 5, 6, 7 o'clock, and it depends seasonally, right? Summertime versus wintertime, things of that nature. And then you have to look at the quality of calls. So at 10 o'clock, you start to get a lot of volume. Later in the evening, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, you will start to see more violent calls come in. Part of the reason and the benefit for the 4-3-4-4 schedule that we went to is that we have a lot of officers that are covering between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., where we have very, very high quantity of calls. But then we have a high volume of officers or a high number of officers who also cover from 8 p.m. at midnight, where we have high volume of violent calls coming in. So both of those things could happen throughout the course of a day, and that's all seasonally dependent. August, September, you're going to have more calls for service than you are obviously in January and February. But when you start to make those phone calls, so that answers the peak time, peak season part of your question, hopefully. The second part is call wait time. That's a lot of the stuff that the chief had mentioned that we're working on right now is how long are people waiting? Depending on who you call, 911 versus the non-emergency number, everything gets triaged at different points, either at the non-emergency point or at the 911 center point. If it's a call that's not in progress, it's going to be coded as a priority 2 or priority 3. So it's not going to be dispatched at the same rate of speed, the higher priority that a priority 1, an in progress type of call. We've really tried to work on the priority 2s and 3s, some of the areas that we've seen the biggest reduction in call wait time since the schedule implementation is about 40% on priority 2s and 3s. Those are the calls that you all are getting the primary complaints. For a priority 1 call, we average about 3.5 to 4 minutes. It's an in-progress call. Priority 2s and 3s, 10, 15 years ago, we were 50% faster than we are right now, but we had 500 police officers. But we've implemented a bunch of programs that are now, the schedule being a very major factor of that, where we're seeing priority 2s and 3s, we're responding to them 40% faster. That's in 4 months.
How many people are there staffing those calls? How many people? Is there 1, 2, 3 people that are staffing those calls?
Yeah, so the 911 center
Not
was,
right, I understand.
yeah, they'll staff, they have call takers who are the people that are actually on the phone. They transition the call over to dispatchers. That changes throughout the day. The times that I've been up there, you usually will see 4 to 8 call takers, people that actually will call in.
All right, because I had a call 2 weeks ago on Kirkpatrick Street, and there was a sign that do not enter. People are coming off 81. That sign was down. I didn't call 911. I called the non-emergency number, but I knew that if that sign was not put back in place, we could have had a major accident. Somebody doesn't understand that. So would you say in this situation, we do call the non-emergency number?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Or you can call the DPW chairperson.
DPW,
you know,
okay.
That'd be me.
Right. Well, in an emergency, you need a quicker response.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna, and also, just for clarification, so nobody gets misquoted or nothing gets, misunderstood, given the priority that all calls that are given to the 911 center are very important. The police department's doing their hard work to answer those calls in a timely manner. But could you just give maybe 2 or 3 examples on your patrol? You get dispatched to a priority 1, 2, or 3 to determine, just so that people can be privy to not what's more important, but what the difference between an inactive versus active.
Sure. So your priority 1 calls are in progress, where maybe the victim and the suspect are still on scene. So a fight that is in progress that's occurring at that time. Now, sometimes a fight that is occurring, somebody witnesses it, hey, there's 2 people, they're fighting out in the middle of the street. Now, hey, 50% of it, the 1/2 of it leaves, and that gets shifted from a priority 1 now to a priority 2 because it's not in progress anymore, and it becomes more of an investigation. A burglary that's in progress versus a burglary investigation. A violent crime, a shooting, a shots fired, those will be priority 1 type calls. But some of the calls, loud complaints, parking complaints, neighbor disputes that are not in progress, those could be coded on a priority 2 or priority 3. level. And again, to your point, it's not that all the calls are important to us, and we really have put an emphasis because our response time has been over the years very, very solid. 3.5 to 4.5 minutes is really a high number for us for priority ones. The priority 2s and 3s, that's where we've seen substantial reduction in call wait
It's
time.
very stressful. That job is stressful.
The 911 center, 100%.
When you're calling that emergency, people, that's just as stressful, in my opinion. You gotta
Understood.
make these calls.
And also, for people to understand the abundance of, you know, you've seen a lot of people where they say, why are there so many police here? A lot of people don't understand that there's a fight in progress with people in the street, and it might require half the department that's on patrol to show up to this, you know, to disperse all the people that are there, versus sending 1 or 2 officers over to an invest or a burglary investigation just to take a report and, you know, hand over proper paperwork and information to the person that was victimized.
Yeah, the analogy that I use sometimes when doing public engagement is sometimes on those priority 1 calls, police officers are an insurance policy. You don't underinsure your house. You overinsure it. So until you know exactly what's happening, if it's a shots fired or a shooting or a fight or something like that, you don't send a policy that comes in under value. You overinsure until you figure out exactly what you have, and then you can start to peel away. Sometimes it's very difficult to get resources in, but having resources there at the ground floor to deal with the situations mitigate potential for issues later on down the road. Police officers, supervision, those things are like insurance policies.
Okay, I want to come back, Chief. Thanks. I want to come back to the overtime spreadsheet. And I want to go back to when you look at number 15.
The second one?
Yeah, the overtime spreadsheet, number 15 in
Is
the
it the
blue.
second
In the
one?
blue,
15?
yes. Now, pay period number 15. And then I want to go back, want to scroll down all the way to pay period in the green, number 1. And there is such a huge difference there. And if I understood you correctly, you say that Deputy Chief Mark Russen made some adjustments. What were those adjustments that tremendously reduce it like that?
Yeah, so I could say it in secondhand, but I guess call Deputy Chief Rustin back up here. I know it was personnel and those commanders came back online that we were paying for, we're backfilling, but Mark can talk about all those things.
Yeah, some of the things was an evaluation. There was a series of ideas. We come up with 8 or 9 different things that we evaluated. Some of the major reductions that we looked at, we have critical staffing numbers and then we have minimum staffing numbers. Under the new schedule, we had to reevaluate our minimum staffing numbers. Easier if I had a whiteboard here, but under the minimum staffing numbers, you have essentially, let's use rough numbers there's 3 shifts, they have different numbers, but you have a certain amount of officers times 8 hours. Under the new schedule, you have that same number of officers times 10 hours. When you backfill for overtime, you're backfilling higher numbers of work hours in that period. So we had to make reductions in the number of officers we had and the times that we made those changes, because the schedule became an 8-hour schedule versus a 10-hour schedule. So we adjusted the number of officers, minimum staffing officers, not critical staffing, and those numbers are 2 totally different things. We adjusted the number of minimum officers that we would have on the shift and that we would backfill with overtime dollars. And then we also adjusted the times that we actually hired those officers. So right now, we're not hiring for days patrol works from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. We are hiring right now from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're not hiring anymore from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. because the call volume is lower, right? The call volume is lower. So we're taking the data and we're saying, how can we be more responsible with the overtime dollars that we do have? Same thing with the afternoon shift. We used to hire an entire shift, a 10-hour shift. Now we're only hiring partial shifts from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. because from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. we have an overlap. And then again from 8 p.m. to midnight we have another overlap. So we're filling in the gaps, right? We're filling in the areas where our staffing is lighter. So we're doing it seasonally with things like summer deployment, we're doing it based upon the hour, doing it based upon the call data, and then we're evaluating the safety for the officers. That was probably the first initial big change, but there was a bunch of other changes that happened as well.
So what you save in the overtime, it's transferred to cover the 8 to 10 hours extra, those hours extra.
Yeah. If I understand your question correctly, yes, is the simple
So
answer.
that's how that kind of transferred to.
It's a shifting of this transition, to the chief's point, this was a 40-year transition. This transition had these, we did the implementation, then there was going to be a maintenance phase, and that was initially part of the maintenance phase of it, was making corrections for the market, if you will.
So if there was enough, this is an big if there was enough savings, let's say from overtime, could that be transferred to other staff activities like trainings or maybe a more robust outreach so we can get those 43 people we're down? Can that be done?
Yeah, that's a Chief Cecil question. The reallocation of
Right,
money is
that's what
under
I'm
his
saying.
purview.
Is that
So-
something?
Absolutely, anytime we have an overage, we can move it, we can move this around anywhere we want if we have an overage.
So you can go through your lines and shift?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So Chief, how come, or at least going into the schedule, this is huge to go from knowing that when we had the contract, right? When the contract was brought in, part of the sale of that contract that got majority of the councilors on board was the saving of overtime, with the understanding that there is an analysis that has been done to be able to, to some high degree, understand that there's going to be some type of saving and some type of officers staying a little bit off, right, from work. I guess my question is, going into this schedule, because this is huge. It's a lot of spending, right? Going into the schedule, wasn't there any level of anticipation and pre-planning going into the new schedule? Because from what I'm hearing, we are being told that everything that costs money here, we just didn't know it was going to happen.
No, I think I understand your question.
Okay.
So if we had done the pre-planning, because contractually, we have changed, not contractually, we have changed the way that we give officers time off in the Uniform Bureau. The time off and backfilling for officers who took time off when you're 3/4 of the way through the year was a big driver of the cost. Any major change, 40-year change in government, those transitions cost money. And that was one of the things that I think you saw here, and we anticipated it. The way that we anticipated it is the schedule implementation team that was working since March of 2023 till the schedule that was there. They had changed the way that officers are now actually given time off, and they bid for time off. So we had anticipated this, but there was really no way to just say to the people in the Uniform Bureau, we're going to deny all this contractually obligated time off. Furlough time, personal time, family illness time. That is a lot of where that driving cost was. But we did anticipate this cost, and then we made the corrections as quickly as we could.
So going forward, Chief, we were budgeted for $5,353,619,000, right? $5,353,619. That's what we were budgeted for. We are in March. What's currently, because what I'm seeing is we have about close to, by the end of this fiscal year, probably that's gonna either double that. Where are we as we stand with it,
Yeah, so if I understand your question, we're not gonna make our overtime budget, but I think we're gonna come very close to making our overall budget, because there's numbers in that overall budget in different categories, different items, line items that we didn't spend. I'll give you an example of, we budgeted for 2 caseworkers that we were gonna hire, and they were gonna be housed elsewhere to take care of and kind of keep track of all these different issues we're having, or challenges we're having with homeless folks, drug addiction and things like that. So we don't lose sight of someone that we officers engaged with this week, tried to get this person help, assistance, got him in a program, and then we just lose sight of him. And 2 weeks later, we're dealing with him again, and he's going through a crisis again. So that was never spent. So there's different line items in there, unspent items, that I think are going to allow us to make our overall budget. I do want to say this too, Councilor. Just keep in mind, this implemented in September. We had already been obviously given our budget for that year. That year, again, with 2.4 million less in overtime, we were more than willing to try that. I sat in front of all of you and said, we'll try it. I don't know if we can match it, but I know the mayor was interested for very good reasons in having everyone take a cut across the board, and we took our cut. We just didn't meet it. Our next budget, and we were asked by the deputy mayor for what is the real cost, and we're going to be submitting a real cost budget of what it takes to do everything we do and everything that continues to get added to us, even when someone says, hey, we've got an alternative response. That alternative response, whether it's diversion response, whether it's response from Liberty Resources, which is great, keep in mind that that budget line goes under our budget. So we might not be taking the calls anymore, but we're still incurring the cost of it. This new budget is going to be higher. One thing, and there's another prime example. For the first time, this budget coming up, because we've had ARPA and we've had other grants, the first time ever, all of our body cams, the entire amount is going to be on our next budget, $1.4 million on our next budget. Never there before because it was being paid for by other monies. But now it would be part of our budget that was never there before. Technology costs money. All those alternative responses cost money because they go in our budget. So we will be having discussions with the deputy mayor and the mayor about the real
But you
costs.
also have grants that may offset that you get approved during the year that may offset some of those costs.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
So you also get grants during the year approved that you have. I mean, there's no way of foreseeing that. You don't know where you're going to get approved.
It's true, Councilor. Unfortunately, well, if you talk about body cams, there's almost no grant out there that will pay for something that you already have. That'll just pay for you to get new ones. So that's why we've been able to do it, because we've increased our, we started with 200 or so. We've increased it to everyone on the department. We were able to do that through grants, but almost no grant will say, yeah, we'll pay for it once you have it. It's always to start a program.
I see.
Yeah, yeah.
So
The,
go ahead. Sorry.
The reduction in the downtown funds, you said it was 250 that was reduced?
The proactive detail?
Yes.
Yes.
So what was the reasoning for the reduction? Was the downtown committees or organizations, buildings, were they required to do have private security at all? And how did that work out?
Okay, so yeah, well, first of all, for Armory Square, and I think you're talking about the other one, but for Armory Square, that detail, there was for a short period of time under COVID where the downtown committee decided to pay for it, came out of our budget. The following year, when COVID lifted, they said, well, we're not paying for that anymore. So the full cost of that came under our budget. We just didn't budget for it because we had just lost 2.54 million, and there was no reason to put a line item in that we couldn't pay for anyways. So it's a zero in our under the item line, but again, it's already up to $205,000. The proactive detail, and again, Deputy Chief Rustin, I'm going to call you up again. The proactive downtown detail, I know, was begun through complaints from everyone, business owners, mayor, common councilors, and we started it. But I don't know the reason. The councilor was wondering why the reason is that we were able to reduce that number of that, which I think we have.
Yeah, we started that program last year. We were starting to see problems under the railroad bridge there, outside of Salt City Market, in and around that area as more businesses came into that area. So we started a detail as on a series of days, and I apologize, I forget the days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, something like that. When we changed it, we went to July 1st and we went through the new budget. We budgeted for the Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But there were still issues that were coming up. If you remember last summer, we started to install the fencing down there. But increasing that police presence was a big request. So we actually increased the number of days that was there. So budgeted for one thing, but the request became something different, and that's why we've gone through on that detail. But we've also expanded as well too. You know, it used to be just really outside the 500 block of South Salina Street, southern downtown. But now they have, you know, as we've gotten more efficient, we've asked them to go a little bit broader. It's the same thing with Armory Square. Armory Square used to be just really in that Walton, Clinton, and right in that, you know, in the heart of it. But now we've added officers there as issues have popped up. We've curbed those issues, but we're saying, hey, officers, that you're in a mobile position, please go over to Hanover Square. Please go over to some of our northern district businesses that are open at nighttime. So we're not being static in our decision making with that.
So going back to the scheduling, I don't know if it's going to be either of you. Going back to the scheduling, I think last year when we had a conversation here around scheduling, there was a statement that per a shift, it was 16 to 24, depending on the need. That 16 to 24 officers per a shift. How has that changed with the new time shift? And has that, what are the updates on that?
Yeah, first, I think Deputy Ruskin answered it more eloquently, but I don't know if the number was ever 16. I don't think we have any shift that has 16, unless you're talking about additional officers, but no shift is at 16. They're all higher than that. But I think it has to do with that, what Mark's going to tell you about the minimum versus critical staff.
Yeah, so the numbers on the shift have hovered generally since September, and it depends on the shift. Like afternoon shift is a little bit larger, but they're at 28. Days patrol is around 25, but that 25 number is really from 10 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then midnights is right around 22, 23, 24 in that general ballpark. But there's a couple of areas that I think you need to focus on. The overlap I've already talked about, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., midnight or 8 to midnight. You have both of those shifts overlapping. So you have between 40 and 50 police officers in the city. Those numbers are unheard of for 6 hours out of the day. And those are 6 business hours, if you will. 6 of those hours, you've got 50 police officers. That's one component. The other component is power days. And the power days happen every 15th day. So the way that we structured the schedule, there's a power day, and they happen 3 days in a row. So days patrol will have a power day one day, the next day will be afternoons patrol, and then the next day will be midnights. And they will have everybody that works for the shift working that one day. So this week we have a power day happening tomorrow. There's going to be roughly 60 police officers on days patrol that are going to be working. Some of them are going to go to training. That helps us with our training costs. Some of those folks are going to be working on a program through Lieutenant Malinowski where we're having all kinds of, substantial issues with stolen vehicles. And they're going to be going out and they're going to be, actively engaged in the community to address stolen vehicles by handing out vehicle locks. They're working with Matthews, who are handing out the vehicle locks. We have 1,400 of them. And they're going to be going out to the community, and those officers are going to be working on that. That would have never happened under the old schedule. We would have never had that. But that's happening on days, afternoons, and midnights where we're all working as a collective unit to deal with stolen vehicles. These power days are being used for training. They're being used for larceny investigations, like the Rite Aid stuff that Chief Cecil had talked about. We didn't just dump that onto overtime dollars. We just went to a meeting at 4141 Valley. All the business owners down there, we had a meeting, I think just around Christmas time, where they were really concerned about some stuff. We had used the same footprint from the Rite Aid strategy, used the power day where we had additional resources and dedicated those people to addressing larcenies at 4141. We're about to do the same thing at 200 South Geddes Street. And that's a use of the power day. That never would have happened under the new schedule because you would have never had 60 police officers that are doing it. So stolen vehicles, larcenies, retail theft, the use of Coper curves, that's a new gun violence strategy that was brought in through the Investigations Bureau training through DC Shulsky. The interaction between the those bureaus between training and sports services under DC Sholsky, the investigations under DC Trudell, the schedule didn't just happen in a vacuum. Everybody's maximizing it to the best that we possibly can in terms of the training, the schedule implementation, the investigation side of the house, gun violence reduction, all those strategies. It's all happening because, you know, those three bureaus are working and maximizing this new opportunity.
Chief, I have a question, and I want to go back to overtime. So you have the percentage of officers are out of work on disability. The amount of money that you pay, and I don't think we've talked about this, workers' comp payouts. What percentage of this contributes to all that overtime?
Yeah, so we don't have workman's comp. We have 207C, which is the equivalent of workman's comp for police officers.
Okay.
It's state-driven. But it you know, Counselor, it comes into play all the time because there's a rotating list of folks, whether it's a 3-day injury for chasing someone down the street with a gun or a long-term injury of getting in a car accident and being out with a back injury. So
Is that going up? Is that, you see more to, where officers are calling out because of injuries? What percentage of time are they out? And how much does this contribute to the overtime?
yeah, so I don't know. Deputy Chief Sholsky, I don't know if you know off the top of your head if that number has risen. I think it kind of hovers in the same kind of number all the time, but how many people off at any given time?
Currently, we actually have quite a small list of people that are out with long-term injuries for on-duty type accidents and things like that. And if you're not talking about on-duty stuff, just sick time in general, with the new contract that just got passed in March, it's actually come way down, probably well over 50% down from what it used to be because we implemented a bunch of new sick rules that they have to have doctor's notes every so often or things like that. So it's just,
But
it's
the
really been
risk
able to
is
curb it.
higher now. The risk is higher when they go out on their shifts. There is a higher risk.
It's
for what
definitely a
they're
job
doing.
with risk, yes.
Okay. So that would contribute when they get hurt. I mean, God forbid they go in a situation and they, you know, it could be they could go to a drug house. They could be confronted by someone. They could fall on garbage. They could fall down steps. You know, we have to take that into consideration. Then they go out of work and now you're short-staffed.
And then we have
One
to
or two
backfill on top of
officers,
it.
now you got to get people to cover that shift, and then, you know, overtime comes into play. So we want to know, like, we look at the amount of overtime that is there, but we want to know sometimes what are the roots of the overtime. That's what I'm on. All
Yeah,
right, thank you.
we definitely have to backfill on overtime for the injuries that
Right,
we do.
we
that are
understand
incurred,
that. We
for
want
sure.
to know, like, what the roots are.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
So we have another agenda item.
I have one more
but-
question.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So, you said that the call volume, the reduction of calls is down 30%. But it seems to me from what I'm hearing, everyone, well, you and the other chiefs say, is that the request for like call to action from like city officials, businesses, that would probably not be considered in the call is up? Is that the case?
I don't know if it's up. You mean when counselors call and ask for, like, call an individual deputy chief and ask
Yes,
stuff?
yeah.
I don't know if that's up, to be honest. I get a lot of those. Deputy Chief Rustin gets them. Probably we all do. It seems to be down a little bit. I think it may be because, again, the 30% reduction in those quality of life complaints, which were the bulk of what I would get. Even from the mayor, he'd call and say, you know, somebody's been waiting 4 hours for a response. And those calls came in frequently, those 4-hour waits. It's crazy, but it would happen, and I would look it up and find out what was going on in the city that made it that wait. But I think those are down. I don't know if the deputy chiefs are. Rustin, you probably get the most of those. Are you seeing more or less calls from elected leaders about complaints? Yes.
I think those go to the captains primarily now because of the district system and the way that works. Like usually they have a captain's phone, you know, that they're gonna reach out to. But you know, I think the same number of calls from counselors as we work through projects. But I think that just to be clear, the number of calls that SPD takes on a year-to-year basis is fairly static over time. I couldn't give you the number here, but I will get back to you with what that number looks like, that trend line of 10 years, what that looks like. Where we've seen the reduction is the amount of time people are waiting for police services.
Okay.
So the number of calls where people are calling 911 or non-emergency, things of that nature, that has stayed fairly static. But what has not stayed static is how long people are waiting. That has been a big reduction. The schedule was a big driver of that. Again, just since September, it was a 40% reduction in priority 2s and 3s, and that's where I think people get the most frustrated.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Chief Cesar, you talked at the beginning when I came in about the Butternut Street retail theft, and you mentioned that SPD. Did you mean financially we're able to help with this? Is that
No,
what you
we
meant?
didn't give them any money, if that's what you mean, Counselor, for the record.
Well, how were you?
Yeah, so what was happening is, again, there's a few people, as usual in this city, a few people cause 90% of the problem. Same with retail theft. You had a few people that were coming in there, regulars almost every day, every other day, and just stealing stuff, swiping whatever they could to take it out there and sell it on the street. And they came to us, again, I think it was $250,000 a year. I think their benchmark was 280. If we reach that number, we're closing. They partnered with us. What we did is because of the shift, as Deputy Chief Rustin mentioned, we had extra resources to put there to be able to respond quickly. What they had done is just given up calling. They weren't even calling us anymore. They just let somebody come in and take what they wanted. What we did, they would call officers that were dedicated in the area. Here comes so-and-so coming in to steal again. We would go there and make the arrest. We also had the district attorney on board for these chronics to get the person either into treatment, if that's what it would take, or jail time, if they're going to continue to go in and just steal whatever they want. And that's what did it, is dedicating resources, not money, but resources, people dedicated to respond there within.
Just wanted to make sure
within
that.
seconds, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
So for the sake of the discussion, I would like Chief to get another committee meeting along the way, in maybe a month or 2, 3 times to really come back and really have a discussion around strategies of addressing overtime and strategies that we want to, as counselors, as we go into the budget season, that we have an understanding with the police department, and that those strategies that we are aware of, and then you guys are aware of some strategies that we can figure out, because this is a thing. It's an issue that continue to come up and up and up, and we want to figure out some ways where we can all collectively stay on this issue.
Yeah, happy to do it, Counselor. It has been an issue over the years in my career. Sat here many times talking about overtime. I think the real cost will help solve that. If we give a real cost budget, I think we can stay right on target with that. But if money is taken out of our budget, it will be difficult. The question that's come up time and time again, and I've seen 12 different chiefs sit up here, is they'll ask, what do we want to cut? And then you start looking at the list. Or Armory Square, festivals, and you start going down that list, and you realize it's going to be difficult for us to pull out of any one of those things. There was a year where there was talk of pulling out of all the festivals. Let them get private security. Never happened. And what do as a police department? We budget for it, and because we know if no one's there, there may be a problem. You hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And if there's a problem, we're going to be on national news with a car running right through one of these festivals. So it's always, the question always is, Counselor, happy to meet, is what do you cut when you have all these projects that keep getting put on our plate?
Is there any, based on the festivals, is there any, or has there been any agreements with the festival organizers to pay a portion of that fee at all?
Yep, great question, Counselor. And I think that I think from alcohol sales, there's a certain percentage that comes out of there. It goes into the general fund though, and we never see it. It does go to the city's
general
fund.
fund.
Yes, but there is a portion of alcohol sales that I believe goes and goes right to the city. Yep. So in some ways, they are reimbursing. We don't see it in our budget though.
So shifting gears a little bit, we also wanted to touch on another agenda item, which is part of your budget shift, which is shot spotter, and just wanted to share how's that going. And for some people who don't know what shot spotter is a gunshot detection mechanism or device that uses microphones in target areas to alert police officers about potential gunfire, which is, it can be taken as in a real time. Let's see how that has helped. Is that you, Chief, who's gonna address it?
Yeah, he's gonna come,
Okay.
yep, I'm gonna abdicate my seat.
Thank you.
So if you look at page 9, I showed you where the north, so we have originally we got it on the south side of the city, and that's the map in the southwest bottom left-hand corner. That was our original area. It's 2.14 square miles. And that was the first contract we entered, and we liked it so much that we expanded it to the north side. And these areas weren't just picked out randomly. If you look closely at your map, you'll see little what we call hotspots in them, and that's where the vast majority of our gunfire is in the city, so that's why these locations were chosen. And so the north side is about 3.5 square miles. It's a little more spread out. And there were 2 separate contracts. Our budget office was working on trying to combine that into one contract going down the road, but they were entered into at 2 different times. So that's what we have. What I can tell you, high level stuff, is that when we got the shot spotter, our shots went up 35%, and which indicates that there's a lot of calls, shots that people were not calling in. And what also is important to us is that our evidence collection from shots fired also went up about 35%. So it's not taken in a vacuum. If you get a shell casing or some shell casings, they all have markings. They get sent off for testing. We have some tests we can do in-house. You try to compare it to other shots fired, and maybe at some point in time, so if you have a victim or not even have a victim, you can start tying these shots fired together. So that's kind of what it is. It's a tool in the tool belt that we find very useful. It goes along with other things. We just had a conviction last week based on a shot spotter call. And wound up having an individual convicted. Well, it was just part of it, the package. I mean, there's other things that go with it. Working with other entities, but that led to an arrest and a conviction for gun possession and shooting.
So you're saying that, Chief, that there has been in our city, in our community, that shot spotter has actually led to solving crimes
Yes.
in details, and it shows that. Okay. I'm asking that question, Chief, because there are other communities that have let go of shot spotter completely, because research have shown that it's said to be effective, but not really. You were saying that in the case of Syracuse, it actually works.
Well, we send people on all of our shots fired calls, and we look for evidence. I don't know what other cities' processes are, but we verify that they are actually shots before we call them that they're shots at that final report. So we respond to everyone, we report on everyone. And we, as an organization, like it. There's costs associated with it. Maybe that's why the other companies are going away from it, or cities, but we like it and we find it valuable.
You might have said this and I didn't catch it. What are some of the evidence that when you hear, or at least you are given an alert, and when you get there, what are some of the evidence you gathered that this alert is actually accurate?
Well, there's several things, but the first thing is going to be if there's any shell casings, right? I mean, that's clear evidence that there was shots fired. Sometimes it happens occasionally. It's good technology, but you'll get there and you find a pile of paper indicating that it wasn't a shots fired, it was fireworks. So that's no longer a shots fired call. And then if it's a revolver and there are no shell casings or people pick them up, which has happened in the past, then you can maybe compare it with witness statements and to verify that there are actually shots fired.
Because in the other cities, some of the things that they are saying, especially with Chicago, is saying that this is basically, it didn't work. Buffalo, our neighbor, said that it didn't really work. And some of the false alarm that goes off that indicate that shots fired was there. They say that firecrackers is one of them, and construction being another, and several other indicators that trigger that false alarm, show alerting officers or at least law enforcement that there's a shot fired. And when people get there, there's nothing, obviously, because of the stuff I just listed. And I'm wondering in our city, what are some of those indications? Have you seen firecrackers,
Construction sites.
yes. Have you seen those coming up and
I don't
when
know
you
if we've
get there?
seen the construction. We have had cases where there's been fireworks, but their technology is pretty good. And there's other companies besides ShotSpotter out there that do this. To our point, our shots fired where we recovered evidence was up 35% when we got that. There's an indication that it is in fact working, right? We have 35% more evidence than we were getting before we got it.
Okay, and that's a 35% increase that you have seen. Was it all 100% shots fired, or was there other triggers?
No, that would be
contributed?
35% more evidence of shots fired.
Okay.
like bullet casings, and stuff
Okay.
like that. 35%, that's the hard, cold number. That's what our shots fired calls went up. And the evidence collection also went up 35%.
And when you got there, you saw shell cases and other evidence that showed that there was actually a shot.
Yes, sir.
Others.
I have a question about the cost per area.
Yes.
So the north side area has quite less in units, I'll call it, I guess, devices, and cost more.
The north side is 3.5 square miles and the south side's
Yes.
2.14. So the south side, the area is smaller and it's less expensive.
Yeah,
So
so
they
as
they
far
correlate.
as far as shots in that area that cost more, how often are you getting calls for that area?
I don't have the exact data, how many shots fired for that call. I think it's in the package, though, if you look through it. Just because the report that they send us, on page 3, will show you year over year, how many shots fired calls,
Page 3.
and by month. And then we have another one on page 4 that shows you by the week. And then there'll be another one on page 5 that breaks it down even further, shows us where they are by time and day. We use this to deploy our resources. And then on page 6, it'll show you that we had 20 shots fired in the south zone, but there were 52 rounds fired. So a lot of those were multiple shots versus one shot being fired. And then there's, at page 8, there's, and this is just for one particular period, it shows that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 shots fired on the north side, and significantly more on the south side. I'm on page 8.
But where does it say, what's the locations? Is the colors by location? I
Yeah,
don't
see
see
the
that
dots on
breakdown.
page 8?
Page 8.
The red dots?
Yes,
Yep, that shows you where the shots were fired in
no,
that
but
particular reporting period.
on the, like, page 3 through
Well,
5.
those don't show you where, but if you go to page 10, it'll show you by street where the shots were and how many shots were called in during a particular reporting period and how many rounds were fired. You see what I'm talking about?
I'm blind.
There's a sheet there. That's just for this reporting period.
So folks, are you all set, Counselor?
I'll look it over, yes.
Okay, so on page 10, for example, on South Geddes Street, it says there were 5 rounds. Was that 5 round, is that what the shots spotter is saying, or after you got there, you actually verified that there were 5?
They
Right.
kind of, they go hand in hand, right?
Okay.
Like the original report's gonna say 5, but we go out and verify. So if,
Okay,
you should listen to this. It's very accurate. You can actually hear when it comes in on, there's an app on your phone, you can actually count the shots when they come in. Unless
Okay.
they're too rapid fire, but for the most part, you can actually count them.
what would you say the percentage of accuracy in that, once?
They're very accurate.
verified?
I don't have that exact number.
Okay,
If I may ask a question, in regards, I'm in favor of ShotSpotter because of the tremendous amount of information that it is given to the police department, the detectives, and those that are on patrol. But for those of us that don't know the process of ShotSpotter and how it's, being used for investigations, arrests, and everything like that, I don't know if you want to answer that, or Deputy Chief Trudell, or whoever wants to come up and just give us the rundown on how effective it is for, making arrests and also getting guns off the streets.
Chief Trudell, Investigations Bureau at the Police Department. To answer the first question, do you have this report here, the year by month? The accuracy is on that report. If you don't have it, we can get you a copy of it. But we're running at 96, 95, 97, 94, 96, 100%, 90% accuracy. So I think that goes to your question about ShotSpotter comes in as a shot and we verify it as a shot over 90% of the time. So it's very accurate. And they have folks on their end that won't even put out a fireworks or a car backfiring or anything like that. So there's levels of verification before it even gets to us. But when it does get to us, it's 90+% accurate. In terms of our investigations, ShotSpotter, like the chief said, is a tool. So what ShotSpotter will tell you is if there's multiple shooters. A group of casings here, a group of casings here, allows our officers to very pinpoint locations they search for the evidence. It also tells us if it's automatic gunfire. So whether or not there's a high capacity gun, whether or not it's automatic, one pull the trigger, multiple rounds are fired. Excuse me. It'll also tell us if an individual is moving, whether walking or in a car. It'll tell you the speed at which. And there's an accurate report that comes out from this, and the chief mentioned this. We go testify, our analysts, our officers have that accurate report and can testify very specifically to the number of rounds, whether they were moving or not. All of that helps with the investigations. We've used them and I know of in the last several months in 3 cases that went to trial. We've had experience in our RICO prosecutions where we've used ShotSpotter in pretty much all of those. So it is a tool. There are specific examples of officers getting dispatched on a shots fired, getting there in time through ShotSpotter, and arresting people with guns on scene. So, is it the end-all, be-all to our gun violence problem? No, but it definitely is a tool that helps us investigate and solve those crimes.
What would be the time frame of an officer prior to ShotSpotter to gather evidence? It makes you knock on doors, it makes you ask questions versus having a ShotSpotter where we have cameras also connected with those. We're able to pinpoint a lot of things to help with the investigation as well.
That's a great question because, the times of our witness cooperation back 10, 15 years ago is completely different as it is now. So not a lot of people are coming forward helping us with that. Through our community engagement, we're trying to help with that. But ShotSpotter is good within 10 feet or so. So when the officers have the app on their phone and they can look down and say, okay, ShotSpotter is saying that shots fired is at this location, and I go to that location and I find the casings, huge time savings. Whereas before, 35% increase in the number of shots casings that we found. One particular point, I was hearing this in the back, I think it's very important that you don't compare our jurisdiction with other jurisdictions where ShotSpotter hasn't been successful. And I'll give you an example. We were doing a gun crime investigation where we went down to Georgia. And we went to a specific city, I'm not gonna name the city, but we're out with the detectives on that gun investigation when a shots fired goes out that they don't even respond to. Shot spotter, shots fired investigation, nobody's hit, they don't even go on them. We are completely different in our jurisdiction where we put a very high emphasis through DCJS's funding through GIVE, gun-involved violence elimination, and our overall goal to reduce gun violence, which was our #1 goal last year, which we did. We put a very high emphasis on it. So we think it's very important that an officer actually responds to every single shots fired. Shows up, shows the community that we were there, recover the evidence, and ShotSpotter allows us to do that. When we start to normalize shots fired like other communities have done, just based on the officer's resources to go or the community's attitude towards it, that's when shots fired and gun violence goes the other direction from where we have gone. So I think it's very important that we don't compare ourselves to Chicago, where ShotSpotter may not have worked or it is not implemented properly based on the number of officers they have or for whatever reason. I think we're a different jurisdiction.
Other questions?
Yeah, so I'm trying to piece together everything that I need to know, but because it seems to me, as far as the earlier on question with the budgeting portion of it, the reallocation of funding. And it seems to me, based on the reports of 40% shots fired down, 50% shots injury down, 60% of people dead down, and the number of what I can see here, because I can't really make out everything as far as area, other than on page 10, where I can go through the streets that I do know for certain, and that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, less than 10 streets that I would think are not on the south side area, south or west side area. And based on page 7, the north side, I feel as if that there could be a reallocation of some funding in that area. Maybe not completely, but is there a area in the north that maybe they don't have a lot of activity at all, where that can be reduced?
I mean, that's where you have to look at those hot spots on page 9. It is more concentrated on the southwest side. Right now, we don't have the ability to reallocate those cameras right now, but in the next cycle, we will reevaluate where our shots fired are. If we need to move resources somewhere else, we can do that. But there's fixtures that are already put in place.
I'm not necessarily saying to relocate the fixture. I'm saying cut the feed. If you don't have another place for it, but if it's costing us, and this is a dead zone, why are we paying for that? That funding can be reallocated somewhere else.
It could. We're in a contract for 3 years. And I think I put those in there. I can get those for you. When the contracts expire, we can reevaluate if we really want them in those areas or not.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yes. Chief, talk about shots fired, where it's coming from. Can you tell us that people commit these crimes on the south side, don't live on the south side, don't live on the north side, maybe live out of town? In other words, they can commit a crime, a shot right here on the north side, and in 2 minutes they're on the south side, west side, anywheres. And then you're going to get it for. Can you ever tell us the shots are coming from the same group or the same individual, and they just move around?
So, I mean, that's what our analysts do, right? We have at least 4 analysts, and Rich Shaw would know better than me, and we're hiring more to track this stuff, to find out if there's a shots fired here on South Ave, and then there's a shot fired here on Butternut Street. Do they match, right? If they match, why do they match? Or, that's the things that we do. Try to figure out where they're coming from, where we anticipate there's trouble, where there's the next rounds are actually maybe coming from.
A lot of these people who are committing these acts, not from the city. They're outside the city. Or
That's true, and people are very mobile, and they live all over the county.
So that should be emphasized, that these are coming from people who are just mobilizing around the state, wherever.
Many of the people that we have our eyes on don't live in the city, that's correct.
Thank you. Okay.
I think that will do it for us.
Also, I apologize, I thought you had a copy of the one that had the specific numbers that Deputy Chief Trudell was speaking on. I see that former Auditor Maroon does have a copy of it. If you'd be able to get you that, it would help you understand the accuracy.
Yeah, we'll make sure.
Thank you.
I do also want to commend you all for the hard work that you're staying true to doing with policing our community. And I do actually want to really commend and the reactions to gun violence. Say thank you to all those officers that are, every day risking their lives to chase after these guys to get these ghost guns off the street, because that's another problem that we're having. A lot of ghost guns, a lot of young children that are getting their hands on these guns. And just thank you all for doing that as well.
We appreciate that, Counselor. Our very brave young men and women get a lot more guns in a month than I got in a career, so it's just a different world out there now.
It is.
Well, we want to thank you, Chief Cecil with your team, Chief Shaw, and everyone. Thank you for attending today. That will do it for us today. Thank you.